You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from the local area and around the world. We're very fortunate in this show to have some of the world's best athletes, sports people, coaches, sports psychologists, many people who work in the field of sport and participate in sport. We're also very fortunate to have a segment where we have some of the world's most influential people in the field of psychology and related fields who talk about their perspectives on psychology and mental health. And today we had a really fascinating guest, really fascinating guest. You're in for a real treat today. Fascinating. He's been on the show before and been kind enough to join us again. He's just released a book, Riding Shotgun, the Autobiography of the Original Wizard of Oz. He's played professionally in the UK, in Spain. He's played as an international footballer for Australia. He was known, one of the fans' favourites at Reading, one of the greatest Reading teams of all time. Really, you can make a case for that. And he's also worked as an agent or an assistant to Beckham, which is fascinating in itself. So I guess we could almost have a mini-series. We could turn this into a Netflix series, really, with so much to cover, and we're going to get going straight away. Andy Bernal, great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on board.
Hey, Jimmy. Really good to be on again, mate. And it's actually quite, I'm not sure if the right word is strange, but it was only a few minutes ago I was talking to someone else here in Australia, and they just read the book, and they said they weren't sure that a movie would do it justice, and the Netflix series thing came up, and you just mentioned it not a few minutes later. So I really think I don't take it lightly. I lived it, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's destiny. I don't know if I made my own luck. I don't know if I came into the kind of alignment with other stars of the game, but it just happened, and I know I've got a movie or a series.
Absolutely, no, it's fascinating stuff, Andy. I mean, sort of, there's so many different sort of chapters and so many different sort of components of your life that, but I suppose we could sort of, we start with Spain and being the first Australian playing in Spain. Obviously, to play in Spain now is difficult. There's so much talent out there, but back then, going over there as an Australian, you could argue that you're a pioneer of Australian football. Can you tell us about your experience in Spain, Andy?
Well, I think you're on the money there with the pioneer or trailblazer. It's almost, it's more than just playing in Spain. It's a migrant story, because my father and mother were on the same ship that left Spain in 1961 and landed in Australia, and I became the first Australian born to Spanish parents to go back and play in arguably one of the greatest countries on the planet, Spain, a country they had to leave because of poverty. And so it's in itself, it's a fantastic migrant story, and came about through me progressing through the junior ranks in Australia. I was born with a problematic left knee, which kind of handicapped me a little bit, and in the end allowed me to play to the level I played. But I think I had earlier ability to play high levels. But at 18, I was identified in a European tournament by Vicente Del Bosque. He was Real Madrid and became Spain's manager, and he needs no introduction. He's a world galactic coaching and everything else, and he identified me and offered me to go over and train with Real Madrid. But at a similar time, I had a contact and an uncle at Gijon, Sporting Gijon in Spain, and they said, "Look, come over and a trial." And I went that way. It was a smaller club. It kind of felt a little bit safer, with an uncle over there. But because the reality is, we were talking about 35 years ago. No mobile phones, no messenger, no. I communicated with my parents via letters. Or the occasional collect call, and there's a part in my book where I get health and how maybe that affected me in later years. It was you build up defences and you build up, pain kind of barriers that now, a birthday might come along, I kind of block it out. They're horrible things because, I couldn't live them. So it's, but it was, to keep it positive, just a wonderful experience. And, I was one of the top 5 teams in La Liga back then. A young man, 18, 19. My best friend became a kid called Marcelino, who's now Athletic Bilbao manager. Very difficult to get into that Spanish international. So they loaned me out. And, about 72 games at the age of 18 and 19. First 11 against Valencia, La Coruña, Real Madrid, Sevilla, Real Betis. Probably the best years of my life, and it was probably the end of my knee towards the rest of my career was almost on one leg, but that was unfortunate from birth, but beautiful times, at 18, 19 to be playing in all those magnificent stadiums. The first game my parents saw me play after a year of not even seeing me was against a full house at Mestalla.
Wow.
So, and my coach at Albacete, I was on loan to Albacete, which was Iniesta's first club, and he was a Real Madrid legend that had played behind Puskas, Di Stefano, Hento, and these guys, and for him to say, Andy, you remind me of me, and you're going to be my number 6, was a big accolade in itself, and I learnt a lot. I learnt from him and the Spanish football system more than I'd ever learned in Australia in all the previous years that had come before.
No, that's really interesting, Andy. I can imagine in Spain. I mean, that's a fascinating point you've made there. Sort of, with all respect to Australian football, and you go to Spain, and obviously, Spain's one of the great footballing nations of all time, and the technical ability, the comfort on the ball, and here you are, a tough player, a tough defender. And what was it like to sort of be in Spain technically, to sort of some of the players that you'd been playing against who just have so much comfort on the ball? And obviously you played against some good players in Australia, but Spain is Spain, to be fair. Yeah,
well, it was. I agree. It was a totally levels above. And it's the first training sessions, you're immediately you're immediately kind of like put into categories by all the players. Every little player, every coach is looking at you, and that first touch of the ball, if it's not sublime like theirs, you're put into the kind of almost panel beater category. He's a worker. He just kicks people, and but everybody. What I did learn was that even if you were, I wasn't one of the. I was technically a good player as well, but at 18, 19, for Del Bosque to say, you're as good as my defenders, you've got to have something about you without sounding too weak. But then there's midfielders, the Xavis, the Iniestas, a lot of the Spanish players that are just quite amazing. The technique about them. But you quickly learn that you need very good technique in Spain. Yeah. But everybody knows, there's no delusion. Everybody knows the job, and Pachin was the one that really kind of made that really seem real to me. He said, I have 5 or 6 European Cup winners' medals, Champions League medals in my cupboard, 6, 7 Spanish titles, and all I did was win the ball. My job was to eliminate the opposition 10, win the ball, and give it to people that are better players than me.
That's pretty.
He's a guy that's European Championship medals at home, and he's me, win the ball and give it to people that are better players than you. That's what I did.
It's interesting you say, Andy, there. I mean, what I find fascinating when you played in Spain is that I was sort of wondering, thinking about whether, I mean, obviously Spain's always produced great players, great teams, but what we were going to see from Spain, in the 90s into the 2000s was a team that we'd never seen before. And did you sort of sense something special was going to happen with the players you'd mentioned there? I mean, Spain from the late 90s through the 2000s, they're literally unbeatable. You'd be lucky to get a kick. Did you sort of sense that, Andy, while you were there? Because you sort of went at that point where you sort of saw, the revolution of football out there. They just went up a whole new level. I sensed
that. I'll tell you what I sensed and saw. People have a perceived view of Spanish football being very technical. This was back very technical, but not physical, and not as physically demanding as, say, the UK. Wrong. To play in Spain, to play in the EPL, to play for the top sides in Italy, all these people are all these players are wonderful athletes. Make no mistake of that. They're apex predators. They're top level, the best of the best in many. Whether it's endurance, whether it's speed, they all have great assets that they bring to play. The greatest thing that I can tell you about Spain was the two great coaches that I believe unified what was a divided kind of nation in a way, were Barcelona and Madrid. You had to bring them together, and both Del Bosque and Luis Aragonés were just they were Madrid men, Atletico Madrid, but they were from my experience. I never spoke or met Luis Aragonés, but I've been told by many that he was a beautiful man. That the politics of Spanish, as a nation, that on a football kind of level, he erased, as did Del Bosque. And when you came into camp, it wasn't Barcelona, it wasn't Real Madrid, it wasn't Atletico, it was Spain. And if you believed that if you were from Barcelona and you wanted to be Catalan, the door was there, and it showed that he was able to keep people like Piqué, the centre half from Barcelona, that is very Catalan, very Catalan. He loved playing for Spain under those two men. So that in itself, it's kind of like my experience when Clough signed me. That's where we'll talk about that later on. But just great man. He's great leaders of men that have their own special pizzazz, character about them that makes you warm to them and believe in them.
That's interesting. And so in terms of yourself, and then you would leave Spain. I mean, obviously you're in Spain there, and your parents are from there, and you're there, and the football obviously sort of you've broken. To just break into the league there is just a phenomenal achievement in itself. And what sort of was your motivation to move on from Spain, Andy?
The only reason I left was the FIFA rules and laws were quite antiquated back then, and you were only allowed 2 foreigners per team. As I had already played for the youth team of Australia, I was classified as a foreigner. Can you believe it? 10 years later, the European Union opened everything up, but I was competing for a foreigner spot, and they give them to 9s and 10s, so in the top 40 teams in Spain. So, my 2 years on loan, I was, classed in the top, the top 100 foreigners on the planet go to Spain, back in those. And it was one of those things that Dijon wanted me back. Sevilla and Real Betis were putting in offers, but it would have to be if I could play as a Spaniard, and FIFA wouldn't allow that. The Spanish FA wouldn't allow that, but because I had a Spanish passport, the Spanish government were forcing me to do military service. So, for me it was just, it was so horrible because I wanted to stay there. It was just, I was in heaven. I'd established myself. I 3 La Liga teams wanting to take me on, and it was, they wanted me to fight the nation, but I couldn't play for their nation in football.
Absolutely, yes. I see. It's obviously, like you mentioned there, things changed in time, and the
principal thing, it was, years later, you weren't classified as an AINS, as a foreigner, you'd play for the A team. So it just kind of, it was just a happening at a particular time that kind of the cards didn't fall right for me. So I got out of Spain, escaped before I got put into a military prison, and landed in Nottingham. My friend was doing university there, politics, and studying politics, and I'd played in Spain, 72 games against all the big teams, and he asked me one day, he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to have a trial here." But I got into the UK on an illegal passport, one for Australian travellers that can just get, backpackers going for part-time work. So I told customs, it's just for part-time work. And it was later on, when I returned to take up a 3-year deal at Ipswich, they said, "Well, you've been lying to us with this visa." So I got deported eventually from the UK. But in the process, I went and trialled with Cloughy, asked him for a trial, and it was one of the greatest experiences of my life, and myself and Alan Davidson, the only two Australians to ever be signed by arguably the greatest, or one of the greatest managers in British football history.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that in itself is just phenomenal. I mean, to have experienced working with Clough must have been. What's your memories of sort of Clough? And different people say, obviously, I mean, one thing we can all agree on is something special about the guy to have achieved what he did. But your first-hand experience, what are some of your memories of sort of being around Cloughy?
Oh, just initially, walking in and getting a trial. All the first teamers would like to say to me, "Did you ride?" Because I'd ridden my bike. And he liked that. He goes, "You rode your bike here?" I go, "Yeah, over the river." I was looking at Trent Bridge, and he goes, "Do you like cricket?" I go, "Yeah, I love cricket." Then he talks about cricket for ages, and he goes, "What about Trent Bridge?" And I go, "I kind of imagine myself, hitting fours and hitting balls, spraying balls to the boundary, with a baggy green cap on, Gaffer." And he liked that. It was kind of like two madmen coming together. We were connected. It was like he got up and he was telling me how he rolled the arm over, and how he spin it, and how he held a cricket ball, and just madness, And then I was about to leave the office, and he said, "Excuse me, young man," and I can't do the accent, but young man, and I turned around. He said, "You've got your Webb and Des Walker," and I did pre-season and was doing very well for the reserves. And he said, "Look, son, I really like you a lot." He grabbed me every day. We talked cricket every day.
Wow.
It was the first kind of the season, which was still kind of summer in England. It just kind of towards pre-season, towards the start of the season. Yeah. And he asked me what I thought about Viv Richards, Gordon Greenwich, and Desmond Hayden. He was just... And I loved cricket as a kid. I want to be straight into it. He loved it, and I think for some reason he warmed to me, but he was really honest, and he said, "Look, you're too good for our reserves, but I've got Desi and Neil in your position, but I'm going to find you something." So he made a call, and on his recommendation, I signed for Ipswich Town.
Wow, that's Wow, incredible. That's and I mean, what did it do for sort of your sort of confidence to know you've got someone who's won the European Cup twice, someone who's the achievements of Clough in football? I mean, just incredible to think what he achieved in the game when you had the qualifiers champion, and to have someone like that sort of to have someone like that suggest back your ability, and was that like?
Well, when I look back, you look back and I'm now 54, and you kind of think, you know what, it's. At the time you don't see it as so special, but now after the great past, and you kind of you hear a lot of other stories about him, and there's a couple in the book that motivational ones, a couple of motivational ones that he grabbed me once at half time, and he offered me something, and I don't want to give it away, but it was just nothing to do with football. He said to me, "Son, football management's got nothing to do with football."
Wow. Yeah.
And just look, I agree with you. I think looking back now, everything he achieved, and I'm talking about 30 years ago. Nottingham Forest and Ipswich were bigger clubs than they are now, without being disrespectful. They were kind of more prominent at the time. So to go there and have Mr. Clough, rate you as a player, but I'd come from 2 seasons in Spain, 19, 20, and I could play, and my knee was still not too bad. So, but is there a higher accolade than being signed by Brian Clough? Some people get more caps, some people play for maybe a better club, but not many can say Brian Clough signed them.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I was meaning to ask you, Andy, was at that point was sort of, I mean, Peter Taylor, was he still around at that point, or was he? No,
Cloughy was there. Liam O'Kane.
Yeah.
Archie Gemmell was his number 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. He as well. He was very surprised the first day I turned up.
Yeah.
He said, "How'd you get the training, son?" He's in his Scottish accent, and I said, "Oh, on that bike." And he just looked at me, and he looked at the bike. And but I think for some reason he goes, "Where did you say you've played?" I said, "I'm an Aussie youth captain, and played 2 seasons in Spain under so and so and so and so, and played like 72 games, the first 11 against all these teams, and then I can give you numbers and names and that." And he's not a fool either. These people don't suffer fools, so you can kind of pick a quickly. And I was confident because I'd also, I wasn't lying. And Archie said, "I'll go talk to the gaffer," and so he played a part too. It's like Cloughy said, you wouldn't be in my office if you hadn't have been where you've been. He wasn't silly.
Absolutely. And I'm sort of putting into context for some of our listeners, some of our younger listeners who sort of, obviously, people of our generation, others will be familiar with Clough and his achievements, not just at Nottingham, but also Derby and what he achieved there. But putting into context, you're talking about one of the greatest managers of all time, and I suppose the nearest comparison, maybe a Mourinho these days or whatever, along them lines, really.
Mourinho, this level, and you ride your bike to, you ride your bike to the stadium. You find an assistant. You ask him if you can have a trial. If you can see the gaffer.
Wow.
And he goes and has a chat and comes back and says, "Yeah, he'll see you." And then the gaffer wants to talk about you riding bikes and playing cricket for the next half hour.
Incredible. Wow.
Nothing to do with football.
Incredible. It just sort of shows that it demonstrates to the listeners what a character he was, and obviously the talk was that the greatest manager that never managed England. And I think personally it was a travesty he didn't get to manage England, but that's another story for another day. But Reading, a lot of our listeners will know you from Reading. Andy, you sort of, a crowd really, well, the fans warmed to you there. It was a great Reading team, debatably one of the best Reading teams. You get to Wembley. Tell us a bit about the Reading experience.
Oh, look, it was towards, I was 28 already. I've been working as a park ranger down at one of the beautiful councils in Sydney and playing for Sydney Olympic, a kind of non-league type team, level team in Australia, but we were Australian champions. So I was enjoying life, and Mick Hickman took me back there. He'd been my coach at Olympic. He'd become Mark McGee's assistant. And, I was 28 and kind of not many people go back to England or Europe at 28, or just at that. And my knee wasn't. They had done an MRI scan. I'd never passed. I'd had 7 operations. I had no meniscus. I had no hyaline articular cartilage. From 22 to 30, I was playing with no brake pads and no shock absorber in one knee.
Wow.
And that was kind of on one leg. But the mental fortitude and just the dream of, I just wanted to come back and play in England. I'd been denied through the work permit system, and I'd been cut short in Spain because of the military problem. So I'd been denied 10, 11 years, football with Ipswich, Nottingham Forest, or in Spain, and some of the Ipswich Town players, regularly still tell me that they got testimonials because I couldn't get a permit, and it just, I had this drive to come back, and I just wanted to play against Man United. I wanted to play against Man City. I wanted to go to Main Road. I wanted to go play at the baseball ground. I wanted to, all these, Elland Road, all these iconic grounds that I'd a Leeds United poster up on my wall when I was 6, 7. And man, I looked at it, and one day I run out of Elland Road. Wow, like, man, I'm from Australia. It's like, it was like, for us, 35 years ago, playing in England was like going to the moon.
Absolutely, yeah.
One day, and I wasn't the greatest player. I wasn't the worst. I wasn't the greatest international. I wasn't the worst either. But I was of a good level, and I lived my dreams. I played with Keane, Cantona, Giggs, Scholes, Andy Cole, Batistuta, Canisia, great players, VR, Labouche, all the guys, Zola, Mark Hughes, Redondo. I can't, I go to my grave happy. I've lived a football dream, being on the same pitch as all those people. The great Satchel Paige said, you win some, you lose some, but I got dressed for all of them.
Absolutely. One thing that strikes me about you as a player, Andy, you didn't sort of seem fazed by, you mentioned there, so you went back, you're playing for Olympic, and this is respectfully to Olympic, obviously great tradition in Australia and some great players, but you find yourself in Elland Road, you find yourself playing against Roy Keane, it's a whole different level really, but you're on the pitch, and what are your thoughts? What's going through your mind? You see a Roy Keane, a Cole, a Giggsy, and for a defender, really, it's like wow, it's incredible.
I think it is, but I think from that early age, from 15, 16, 17, I would sit in class and I'd look out in Canberra. I'm talking 35 years ago or something like, and I could smell Wembley. I could smell playing against you. I knew I would play either cricket, rugby league, or football on big stages. I loved looking at ovals and stadiums. Everywhere I go to this day, I land in New York, I'm straight to Yankee Stadium. But I want a Met Stadium too. There's just something about them, and going onto the pitch with these guys, I was always a good athlete. I would have been of that highest level athlete if born with a perfectly good left knee. And in the book, details on that and the surgeries that came with it. But I didn't fear. For me, it was a test. Roy Keane. Nothing but respect for Roy Keane. What a great player. Great player. Probably my all-time 11. You get fit in there as a 6, not a problem. But going up against him, why not? It's a challenge. Whatever you give him back, and if he wants a bit with interest, I'll try and do that. And whatever I give him, if he gives it back, I've got to be prepared to take it like a man. So these things didn't scare me. They were challenges. Mark and Giggsy, the call would come out. Oh, you've got to go in to push in the midfield and move Mark Cantona for a minute. Wow. Yeah, for that split second, it's Eric Cantona. It's the king. It's a legend.
Absolutely, yeah.
But you know what? Guess what? If you get the better of Andy, you're going to remember Andy for life.
Absolutely. That's for any young footballers listening, that's sort of priceless, really, to sort of to listen to that, and to sort of be able to make your own mark on the field. And you mentioned stadiums there, Andy, and you mentioned you sort of you sort of affiliation to stadiums. You love stadiums, and you played in debatably one of the greatest stadiums, iconic stadiums in the world, Wembley. Tell us about that experience. It's watching a game at Wembley is an experience. Playing at Wembley, wow. It
was just, it was something that when I joined Reading was kind of never crossed my mind. But growing up in Australia, 10, 11, 12, getting up and watching FA Cups and games at Wembley, on an old ABC or BBC television screen there, like one game of the year that'd be broadcast out to Australia, Craig Johnston, scoring a goal in the FA Cup, and then many FA Cup finals that were the one game that would be screened to Australia per year. Early hours of the morning, middle of winter in Canberra, and just I'd look at this stadium, and then it's so surreal. You find yourself in the bus going to the Twin Towers, walking onto the pitch. There's a part of that chapter is, I kind of pick up a blade of grass and just feel if it's real. Am I really at the home of football? Just very special moments. That again, win or lose, we lost that day, but it was a horrible feeling to lose. But as you get older, you got dressed for it. You played at Wembley. Who can say that? Like in matches that count too. Like that match was worth £300 million to the winning team.
Absolutely.
Going up to the. You're playing in matches that mean something. An end of season friendly match at Wembley, for a charity or something. These playing in the stadiums in important games that mean something. And wow, to do it at Wembley, and then to be the first Aussie to captain an English team, an English association team. Before Viduka, before Gill, before Johnson, before Tony Popovich, before. I didn't realise it kind of till a year or two ago, and they're firsts. They're firsts that will never. They last till the end of time.
Absolutely, and I suppose sort of like you said, the weight of the game, and some of the teams that sort of struggle to get out of the back in the Premiership. That game there is sort of it's like a huge game. There's so much sort of expectation, and everyone sort of wants to break into the Premier League. But did you guys as players sort of feel that? The expectation, or you just like I'm completely focused on what I need to do here? What does the expectation do, Andy, to a player?
We at Reading that year were focused. We just used to go out and play, and you'd go to Sunderland and win, and you'd go to Middlesbrough and win, and we just played. We had a fantastic team, and we were 2-0 up against Bolton. I was already thinking I'm getting ready to mark Giggsy in that next year in the Premiership, and we were 2-0 up. Before we left the dressing room at half time, one of the coaches says 2-0 is the most dangerous score in football, lads. And with about 4 minutes to go, they equalised 2-2. But with about 15 to the end of 90 minutes, Lee Nogan and myself came off with our twinges. We stayed on while training in Spain. Just a change of routine, different surface, different track, and that without being disrespectful to players that came on, it certainly, I think, it changed the dynamic and the rhythm of the team. A very special player. In fact, I think the first goal was a ball from me into him, and he scored one of the wonder goals ever scored at Wembley. Beautiful. But they came back and they won, and you think about it for years, for a year or two or 3 or 4 years, it haunted me for a while, and now I got dressed for the occasion, mate, and
absolutely,
not many can. It's pretty. You take it for granted sometimes, and you talk to people here in especially in Australia, away from Europe, and you say to someone, I've played at Wembley, and then they kind of look at you like you're either nuts, you're lying, or man, this is true. It's kind of wow, like it's a very funny thing being in Australia when you tell. I don't break into these conversations. I very rarely talk like I'm talking to you. I do with my wife. But and at a bar, or you meet people or new friends, and even older friends. There's only very few that I kind of allow any of these stories to come out. I'm not that kind anyway to be boasting that I played here or did that or whatever. But if you start talking, you kind of go. People look at you like I've had family. Initially when I married Janie and kind of went into her family, some of her kind of family were like, he thinks he managed Beckham, mate. what a joke.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I suppose it's surreal, you know, for them, for anyone sort of, you know, from the outside. But I mean, to have experienced it for yourself, and I mean, sort of, you became an agent. What was that like to be an agent? I mean, we sort of hear, you know, different stories about agents. Obviously, it's a challenging position to be in. But tell us about your experience of being an agent.
Oh, look, it was one of those ones where I wasn't sure what to do after football, and a friend of mine, Susan Roberts, was in charge of Fosters and Courage in the UK, said, look, I'll get you an interview with Beckham's agent. I think you could kind of be a good agent or scout for him, and she said, you better be prepared, you know, and you'll only get 5 minutes. So
Wow.
I turned up to Mayfair, swanky old town, and first three names that greeted me as I opened the door were Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and David Beckham. They were the top three clients.
Wow.
And I knew I wasn't going to leave the office. I knew that Tony would take me on. And then within a year, we began chatting about players that SFX had to maybe move into Spain. And you know, with the year before, I met Butragueño and Valdano at the Bernabeu. And I gave them three names: Beckham, Woodgate, Michael Owen. And all three eventually signed for Real Madrid.
Wow, that was you know, one of the Galactica Real Madrid. That was an incredible period.
Yep.
And I suppose our listeners are wondering. I mean, you know, David Beckham, there's a mystique about him. He's sort of, you know, was a great footballer, and obviously he's gone on to, you know, to many other things, and he's got his football club now as well. And what was it like to be to work with him, Andy? Just a bit of an insight into your first-hand experience. I know, you know, everyone has difficult to explain, but yeah.
He was a nice guy, you know, a really nice guy. I think, you know, at the time, Madrid, working with him in Madrid, not with him, but you know, the whole Beckham kind of, you know, brand at the time, you know, Victoria, everything that came with it. She was a Spice Girl. That was a lunacy and a madness that is very hard to explain on the phone. Viewers will read the chat. Wow, you know, it's like I'm in the middle of the Wolf of Wall Street, Jerry Maguire, James Bond, you know, and Galacticos everywhere, and then Ronaldo Nazario, you know, flying in models from all over the world. Just insanity. But he was cool to work with. You know, he's very, for me, the greatest dead ball expert on the planet ever. You know, and I'd watch set pieces with Ronaldo and Roberto Carlos and Zidane and Figo, and he was the best of the lot. You know, in that particular field, the dead ball. He could run all day. He fitted in great. I think the 3 months that I was with him were key. Those first 3 months, in terms of integrating into the dressing room, you know, my Spanish. I was Ronaldo and Zidane and Carlos. You know, I was an ex-player, so they didn't fear me as an agent. I'm not a snitch, and I don't tell tales. And I've been offered a lot of, you know, you know, I was offered millions to divulge information on David, on Victoria, and you know, I didn't do it, and missiles were fired at me because you don't destroy. They then try and destroy you because you don't want to play the game of destroying, you know, their target. We can. I don't really want to go down that one, but that's a tough one. You know, papers have disappeared, and you know, I was a victim of the greatest, you know, media kind of scandal in British history, but you know what? It was a time where I also, you know, made mistakes and got into substance abuse myself. So it was a lot of factors went into my downfall. But I'm also proud that I got out of it, and I'm here and I'm writing a book, and I'm in a good space. But you know, I'm very grateful, you know, to David. We kind of discussed it before in England, and you know, that I was the man to help him, and yeah, madness ensued. You know, it was one of those times where Galacticos and he came together with. You know, he at the time was, you know, David and Victoria were seen as kind of you know, football's answer to the Royals around the world.
Absolutely, yeah.
followed every day by paparazzi, and it was just it was madness. It was just SAS commandos around us all the time. Cuban intelligence officers. It was just and I went from being kind of at the time I was working with Tim Cahill. I brought Cahill to the office in SFX, and then Cahill we took him to Everton, and then I got shipped over and almost became a jack of all trades. Helping commandos out. I was tactical response. I was driving fast cars. It's just madness.
Wow, I mean, it's really. I mean, it's obviously difficult to sort of put in words that sort of experience. And it just seems like it kind of. I mean, you've got obviously Beckham. Everyone's familiar with Beckham. You got his wife. Obviously, at the time, she was in one of the biggest bands. Well, obviously millions of records everywhere. Everyone knew the Spice Girls type thing. She had a very high profile, even beyond that group. And you're around all that. What's it feel? I mean, you're a lad from Canberra. You grew up, and that would have presented its own challenges as a migrant, sort of growing up in the generation you did. But what's it feel like? You're in the middle of all that. I mean, how do you put that into words? It's just incredible, really.
I think I put it into words by just saying I took the same approach mentally as I did on a football pitch. How do you go into a tunnel and you're facing Ronaldo or Roy Keane or Giggs or Zola? You've almost got to be fearless in a way.
Absolutely, yeah. You've
got to say, whatever the job is, let's do it. You need me to be a third commando with you today. Let's do it. Show me. Tell me what I need to do, and I'm in. We're going to war. I'm going to war. It's not football today, but it's making sure that the family and 10 guests are getting to Romeo's birthday safe. How do we do it? The SAS commandos put in a plan. You've got to do this, and that. You've got to drive this car at 200 kilometres an hour as a decoy. You just do it.
Gee, yeah, that's just surreal. It's just, that in itself, I think, is just incredible. And in terms of the World Cup scouting, I mean, you're involved in the World Cup. That's really interesting. Obviously, the South America experience itself. Yeah, and
it's kind of funny one now, but it's not funny because it's addiction's not good either. But it was, the Socceroos asked me to go over to South America for 9 months to scout on all possible opponents for their World Cup qualifying campaign. Eventually, we played Uruguay and beat them to go to the World Cup. But my base camp was Colombia, and I was in the middle of a cocaine addiction. It's just insanity, and I shouldn't laugh. It's not a laughable thing, but it kind of, with all the darkness I've been through, I kind of find it funny now. Like that it would happen, and that I gave them a dossier that was fantastic, and we qualified for the World Cup. But it was it was a time in my life where I was a little lost after the football and Beckham days. The scouting came up. I went over, and again, it was in the middle of my own madness. But I was always, whenever I had to do a job, that came first. During football, I'm very proud that during my football career, I never tried anything. Never. My nickname at Reading was Andy Likes a Shandy. So I was, I went mad afterwards. And there's reasons for that in the book. That the viewers will really, really take on board. But I feel that I'm in a good place now, and I feel kind of validated that I didn't take money and talk any crap, whether true or not true, about David and his family. I don't think it's a nice thing to do. I think there's more dignity in not saying anything. I think people will judge me on that. I kept silent. I took heat. I didn't say anything. They only wanted certain answers that weren't correct. And you know what? I'm here, and I feel good about myself. And like a second coming, a renaissance, and there's good things happening with the book. I really like the project. I want to turn it into a Netflix series. Timmy Cahill's, we're back doing stuff together, and I feel good, Jimmy.
No, that's brilliant. It's good to hear, and it's really obviously, pleased, and it's been a journey, and I'm sure, it's fascinating for our listeners. And in terms of UFC, tell us a bit about the UFC. Is it Dan Hooker, your son-in-law?
Dan Hangman Hooker. Look, he's top 5-6 in the lightweight division. He'd won I think 4 or 5 fights, kind of leading up to the last one, and then lost. And but that's the game. That's UFC. It doesn't overnight make him a bad fighter or a great fighter. It's a little bit different to boxing. You've got to be multi-skilled, but just a great guy. Married my daughter. Have a beautiful granddaughter, and he's still chasing that UFC title. Still a young man, intelligent, but besides the fighting, that I'm very proud of him about, and so is my daughter, and we love the fact that what are the chances that she marries into a sporting family again? It's
absolutely,
and top level at that. But he's a fine gentleman. I don't think to know that your daughter is with a beautiful man.
Absolutely,
There's no greater peace.
So he got through the test, Andy, the initial when your daughter first.
Mate, well, what test am I going to do? It's kind of like, it's no, he was a gentleman. He took me. He was, he wasn't in the UFC at the time, and he said, I want to be a UFC fighter, and he said, and I'd love to marry your daughter, but I can't do the blessing. It was kind of real old school. So good lad. Uncle and Dad, rugby league guys. I think they played for New Zealand and Wigan and St Helens and stuff, and all that sort of stuff at some point. Warrington. I'm not sure what teams, but in North England. So there you go.
No, it's interesting, really, and I suppose that it's fascinating. It's been a fascinating journey for you, Andy. I mean, obviously, there's still a lot that you sort of no doubt want to achieve and do. And in terms of yourself, Andy, what's your vision going forward? You've got all these experiences. You've played in Europe against some of the greatest players. You've sort of played for some of the greatest managers and got to know them and your own. And I suppose in this interview, it's only kind of a snippet, a segment of all the things you've sort of done in sport and other sports you could play. But sort of going forward for you, what do you sort of see your vision in terms of,
I think, I one of the few to have achieved the Spanish dream, the English dream, at high levels, and on a management side, taking care of big name players, and I'd like to think that could leave some sort of a legacy in terms of a role with national teams, with the junior teams, with the senior teams, as a mentor, advisor, ambassador with the side. I think there's a role to play also on the mental side with the athletes. It's very difficult to give advice and offer, offer things to and offer ways and methods to people if you haven't lived the good and the bad.
Absolutely, yeah.
I feel I'm in a place where, I can say, look, you're heading down that path, kid. I've been down that path. We don't want to go down there. Trust me. Come with me. I'll have it. This is a far better path. And now I've studied it a bit. I've been to see doctors of this and that. And you start understanding the mind more and why things happen. And then did all my concussions affect some of my behaviour later on? Who knows? I don't know. There's a lot of things that I explain in the book that may have led me to certain decisions. But what I do know is I feel like I'm in a position to be an advisor to help the young internationals progress and get more kids playing in England and Spain one day. That's the dream for me. I want to turn my life into a Netflix series or a movie because I lived it. I lived the Bond movie. I lived the Wolf of Wall Street. I lived the Jerry Maguire movie, and I lived an immigrant story. One of the greatest. What are the chances of a guy leaving Spain and his son goes back and plays there?
Absolutely, yeah. And at a time as well, the era as well. It's huge.
It's I'm not going to stop until I do it because I know I've got it. I know I've got to move. I've lived it, and that's kind of my aim. And really, it's at the end of the day, I feel good, owning things and coming out, and this is my story to the world. This is my truth. Love me or hate me, you will respect my story.
Absolutely. And in terms of any sort of young player, I know it's difficult to give sort of advice. Each one's unique on their own journey, but with all the experiences that you've had, Andy, and having been there and done that, I think that's the key thing. You've been there, you've done that, you've worn a T-shirt. That's a big deal. I think experiences count for a lot in life. What would you say to any young player, an athlete in general, just trying to make their way in the game? Young 17, 18-year-old.
I would say understand that you need to be a world-class athlete. If you play here in the A-League and you're a star, do you understand that you've got to go to another level if you want to then go play for Reading, QPR, Man City, Chelsea, Real Betis, Real Madrid? The level you have now, understand that you need to be better. And if physiologically you can't, you need to look in the mirror and say, no. Don't be delusional. Most kids, most dreams are destroyed by delusion. Understand where you can go.
Yeah.
Understand where you can play, and have. And once you can understand what kind of an animal you are, you can then understand what kind of battles you can go into. And pick your battles. You can't mark Ryan Giggs if you've got no pace. You can be a great fullback, good player. If you've got no pace, you got to understand that. I can't mark this guy.
Absolutely, it's being true to yourself, and
you've got to be true to yourself, and understand that. You know what? I play A-League, for example. I'm 16, 17, 18. I knew at 16, 17, 18, I was one of the best athletes. Do 400s, 800s, 100s, play rugby league. I was a better league players than football. So I knew, on an athletic level, I was happy to compete with anybody. And you know what? If we had to go up another level, I was prepared to work hard because I knew physiologically I had the ability to get that next level as well. And then it just, once you're at the top levels, it's just a mental game. Some people freeze when Manchester United come to town. Other people, wow, let's go to war.
Absolutely, they're up for it. Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. And it's sort of for any young person listening, I think it's sort of really. And that was Andy Bernal on the Friday Sports Show, Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, with your host Jimmy Petruzzi. Andy Bernal, exceptionally talented sports person and footballer, one of the key pioneers of Australian football abroad. Andy had a professional career in Spain and the UK, as well as a very successful career with Sydney Olympic, and he also played for the Socceroos for Australia. He was one of the top footballer for one of the greatest teams for Reading FC, and really loved by the supporters, great talent, and would become an agent and also manager to David Beckham. An amazing career, an amazing life. He sort of shared a refreshing and honest, open account of an amazing journey for him, and I'm sure a lot more for him to come. So really, really thank Andy for being on board the show, the Friday Sports Show. Your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, on 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show.